A recent poll shows U.S. support for Israel remains steady, though Americans fear our forces could get pulled into a regional war. CBN's Dale Hurd brings us that story.
A new Wall Street Journal Ipsos poll shows U.S. public opinion is rallying behind Israel as it responds to the massacre of civilians by Hamas. But it also shows less support for America's role in the war. 42% said the U.S. should side with Israel, a record high since 2002, while only 3% said the U.S. should take the Palestinian side. Only 38% said the U.S. should commit American troops to help Israel if it's attacked by its neighbors. In the past week, U.S. forces have faced attacks by Iranian proxies. There have been several drone attacks against U.S. bases in Iraq. Last Thursday, over a 9-hour period, an American warship in the Red Sea shot down 15 drones and 4 missiles launched by Iranian-backed forces in Yemen. Secretary of Defense Austin says he expects it to get worse.
What we're seeing is the prospect of a significant escalation of attacks on our troops and our people throughout the region.
Pro-Palestinian protests are also raising concerns of more unrest spreading throughout the region. CBN's George Thomas is in Amman, Jordan.
For the last 2 weeks, here in Jordan's capital, Amman, as well as all across the Middle East, hundreds of people have been coming out almost every night to demonstrate against Israel's military activities in the Gaza Strip. There's a lot of passion, a lot of anger, and a lot of frustration.
Meanwhile, in Israel this weekend, U.S. senators pledged America's strong support.
We have Israel's back. We're going to give Israel everything they need in order to defend themselves.
President Biden is showing strong support for Israel, but after Hamas released 2 American hostages, he's reportedly calling for a delay in Israel's ground advance in hopes of freeing more. Israel says Hamas is holding at least 222 hostages, including some Americans. Middle East expert Dan Senor explains the diabolical reasoning for putting civilians in danger.
Because it serves 2 purposes. One, they know how Israel is so averse to civilian casualties when it's fighting an enemy that it has a deterrent effect. And 2, if Israel does strike a military capability and there are civilians co-located and they get killed, Hamas scores a PR victory.
IDF photos show that since the beginning of the war, Hamas has been exploiting civilians and civilian sites, such as kindergartens, schools, and mosques, for the purpose of firing rockets at Israel. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Dan Senor served as foreign policy advisor to former President George W. Bush. He's author of an upcoming book, The Genius of Israel, one of my favorite books, Startup Nation. He joins us now from New York City. So, Dan, welcome to the 700 Club.
Good morning, Gordon. Thanks for having me.
President Biden is sending a massive U.S. military force to the region. We've got carrier groups, potential deployment of U.S. troops. Do you think we'll see American boots on the ground in Israel?
I'm skeptical that we will. I think that one of the core tenets of Zionism, going back since the founding of the state just over 75 years ago, is that Israel will rely on friends and allies around the world to help with funding for its war efforts, and its security will help with munitions and arms and new technologies, but will not ask friends and allies around the world to expend blood on its behalf. Israelis never want Americans or anyone else to have to risk their lives for Israel's security. That's for Israelis to do. And I think it's important, Gordon, to keep in mind what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, something I think you and I are familiar with, and probably a large part of your audience. But I think what's become very glaringly evident to broader audiences is that we're seeing the forces of barbarism against the forces of civilization in Israel. Hamas versus Israel. And Israel is the force of civilization. And Israel is saying, we'll fight the barbarism. And when we fight the barbarism, it's in everybody's interest, everyone in the West, everyone who holds these values dear, these shared values dear to them and dear to their societies. But we will fight these forces of barbarism against these forces of barbarism. We need help, but our troops will do the fighting. So I think Israel will resist the risk of American troops on the front lines any way they can. It's the last thing they want.
Oh, well, there's another front, and that's the front of public opinion. I've been amazed at the protests in London. I've been absolutely shocked with what Harvard students are saying. But let's just take it to what is, I guess, referred to as old media. The New York Times, the Washington Post, you know, the Gazan Health Ministry, they did not identify it. This is an arm of Hamas. You know, it comes out with this fake news about an Israel bomb in a hospital, and they run with it, and they run with a death total that's obviously completely made up. What in an open democracy where you believe in free speech, where is the counter that please have some editorial control over what you're printing?
Well, it's not just that they relied exclusively on Hamas authorities who have zero credibility for that, for the sourcing for that tragedy. But you notice how quickly they had the numbers. I think they said 500 Palestinians killed, some 500 Palestinians killed. They managed to accumulate, to calculate that number in a matter of minutes. I mean, here we are over 2 weeks into this situation since October 7th. Israel is still calculating the total number of killed and taken hostage and tortured and raped. These things take time. But amazingly, the New York Times was able to determine within minutes that 500 people had been killed. Of course, the number was nowhere near that. It was dozens of people, all lives lost, in that sense tragic. But A, Israel wasn't responsible, and B, the numbers were an actual fraction of what they originally reported. And I think what's happening, Gordon, to get, I think, to the crux of your point, and this is extremely important, what we are seeing right now in these protests in major cities in the United States, on college campuses, and in European capitals, is anti-Semitism on full display. It's like a carnival of anti-Semitism. It's, I tell you, Gordon, as a son of a Holocaust survivor, I mean, and I was just visiting my mother's hometown this summer with my children and with her. So we had 3 generations of our family going back to her roots, where she was chased out of Europe by the Nazis and where her father was killed at a concentration camp. This is full-bore anti-Semitism. And when they are denying Israel's right to defend itself, they are basically saying that the one Jewish state in the world cannot defend itself against a barbaric attack on Jews, the worst attack on Jews since, in a single day, since the Holocaust. It is full-bore anti-Semitism. Now, some will say, oh, you know, are the protests engaging in Holocaust denialism? Is that what it is? If you compare what's happening to the pogroms of history or the Holocaust of history, is it Holocaust denialism? It is not Holocaust denialism. It is Holocaust legitimization. Because if you listen to the rhetoric in those protests, Gordon, what they are saying is, yes, these violent attacks against Jews are happening, but they're justified. They're not saying they didn't happen. They're saying they happened, but we need to understand the root causes of what these poor Gazan Palestinians and Hamas leaders are reacting to. And that, to me, is scary. It is why the Jewish state, in part, was founded. It's why I think everyone in Israel, there's tremendous solidarity in Israel right now. We write about this in our new book, In the Genius of Israel, about the incredible social solidarity of Israel. And Jews in Israel across ideological and religious lines are reminded of what's at stake during moments like this.
Well, we know what's at stake. When I see a banner that says "From the river to the sea," I know exactly what that means and what that is calling for. It's calling for the extermination of every Jew in Israel and the complete elimination of the Jewish state. I know what that means. I can't imagine anyone supporting that, let alone marching through European capitals, through American cities, and in American universities to support that. We've all vowed never again, and to hear the call for it, an open call for it, and it not being condemned throughout our culture and throughout every news organization is absolutely astounding to me. We need to stand against this, and we stand with you. Well, Dan, thanks for joining with us.
Thanks, Gordon.
And thanks for your courage and your steadfastness. We're with you.
Appreciate it. Thank you for everything you do.